today the topic I'll talk about is the AI breakthroughs and globalization. So I'm going to talk about technology. I think you will like it. But let me ask you, Mike and Eric, do you know this, Rough?
Yeah, I not only know it, I've used it.
Cool.
I've
Okay.
heard of it. I've never used it.
Well, Eric is slow, so good. At least you've heard about this.
Yeah.
So let me tell you, I think there's well, at a very interesting moment that we're entering a new stage of the AI technology penetration into the economy, and so my first point here is that uh, I think in the near future that DeepSeek will become it will quickly surpass um, ChatGPT to become the number one AI app with most active users. It only took DeepSeek 1 week to exceed 100 million users. So last time the miracle made was ChatGPT. It took it about 2 months, and now it's just 1 week. And I think right now it's a daily active user is about only after 3 weeks is about uh, close to 80% of the ChatGPT. So it will become the number one very soon. So that's a phenomenon. So my point here is that it has become after the ChatGPT had become the second, uh, becomes second phenomenal product in the past 2 years. Now, you, some of you might ask then, what exactly has ChatGPT done to achieve this? And the firstly is that, let me quickly move to this. Now, the first point is that it's performance. I'm going to skip the technical detail. Basically, it's performance regarding the mathematics, the reasonings, other stuff is really on par with the ChatGPT. So the performance is the first rate. It's catching up. Uh, and that's so there are two type of uh, the models. The one type is the general model, the basic model. So that is on par. And the second type is something called the reasoning model, and you can see is similar. So the point here is that the DeepSeek its performance is on par with the ChatGPT. That's my first point. Now, but the second point, which is the bigger point, is that its cost of R&D and use is just about 10% or less of the ChatGPT or other models. So essentially, what is done is to achieve the first-rate performance at roughly 10% of the cost. So that's like a tremendous breakthrough. Now, then you would like to ask, why would that happen? And it's done a couple of things. So it's done innovations, and I would like to talk about this because it's really changing the landscape of the AI uh, evolution or the competition. The first thing is done is through let's call this the engineering type of the innovation. It essentially because China has limited computing power, chips are limited. So actually, the model companies they try hard actually to save the computing power. So they make a lot of innovations. For example, they use some of the innovations to reduce the computational requirements, and also they use the smarter collaboration. So essentially, use the so-called expert models. So that means that it used a group of expert models, but at one time you only use a small portion of them experts to answer questions. So largely reduce the amount of the computing power it requires. And also it introduced the more direct chips interaction so that to make them much more efficient. So, but these are all engineering type of the innovations. Another type is much more interesting is for these reasoning models to give you some basic logic. So essentially, so there are two types of models. One type is the so-called pre-training models, and then you have the post-training reasoning models. Now, what I'm talking about the post-training reasoning models. So last year, if you remember, ChatGPT, OpenAI published its reasoning model. It's called O1, and it's kind of in the spirit of the slow thinking as proposed by Kalman. So you need to have this a chain of thoughts to slow down to think about the process, have the right process to solve the complicated questions. And the model for OpenAI is something called O1. I think a lot of people are using it right now. Yeah, so I'm talking about that after OpenAI published the O1, many model companies across the world trying to copy it, but most of them failed because they don't know how to establish this chain of thoughts. So a lot of companies spend a lot of money try to really create chain of thoughts data and they use the manual annotations to create the process, then try to train the model to learn the process. So the smart part of this DeepSeek then is actually completely abandon this chain of thought data construction because it's just too costly to do it. In order to save this, what it does to really just starts with mathematics and coding data sets because the logic of them is so certain. You only train these two type of the data and force them to show the reasoning steps, the process, and run this like thousands of times. And so gradually and miraculously, the models learned that to logic. Then you can apply the logic to other of the pre-training models to learn the logic. So the first innovation it does to abandon the root a lot of modelers are doing, but actually to only focus on the type of data that has very clear logic to recover the process. Then you use this reasoning process to deal with other data. So this is very smart. That's one thing. And also then a second innovation they do is to transform from supervised to unsupervised the learning. So basically the model itself will create a lot of the questions that lets the model to train itself. It's really like the AlphaZero. If you remember the AlphaGo, the AlphaZero, it's trained by itself. So that's the second step. The third step is that after it made progress on this reasoning model, then it gives this memory, give this knowledge back to the pre-training model. So that provides a loop that the both model can make the progress. So I would call these are all smart progress, but I would call them so basically they're all the whole purpose is to try to save the costs because in China they are really restricted by the computing power, and so that's those kind of the rules are usually ignored by the Western models. So that's how they make the progress. And so as you can see, then they gradually, because it has to show this the steps. Now you're gonna have the so-called aha moments. You can see that it's starting thinking, and now with more and more iteration, the chain of thoughts become longer and longer, as if it's really thinking. Now, so that's the performance I've already talked about. So what does this have anything to do with the globalization I'm talking about here? Basically, if you think about the first stage of the AI revolution started by the OpenAI's ChatGPT in the past 2 years or so, it is really it's dominated by the US AI companies, from the chip companies to the large language models, cloud computing models, the so-called Magnificent Seven. And so they are dominant. And so essentially, U.S. is the only leader in the past 2 years. China is trailing it, and other countries even less. So that was the situation of how AI globalization is affecting the world, and so basically, and recently, Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, on February 10th, just 3 days ago, he just proposed the three rules of the AI. Let's call it the AI economics. So essentially, he's talking about those three rules will determine how AI will penetrate into the economy and the business. The first is that you're going to invest more, you're going to have improve your models. So this uh, ability, that's easy to understand. The second is that there's this something called the scaling law. So essentially, it's the cost of using a AI model essentially decrease by tenfold. It decreased by tenfold every year or so. So it's much faster than the so-called Moore's law previously. And so this is trying to describe how the demand is generated, the scale effect, the cost is reducing dramatically. And finally, it's going to have, because as a general purpose technology, it's going to impact the globally, the economics and business. So these are the three rules. But what is really not talking about is actually who is doing this, following these three rules. And as I just mentioned, in the past 2 years, it's dominated by the very big U.S. companies. You can talk about this as almost like an oligopoly type of the business, of the industry structure. But so that's the first stage of the AI revolution. Let's call this the ChatGPT phenomenon. It's dominated by the big U.S. AI companies. Actually, recently, just in January, U.S. government published something called Framework for Artificial Intelligence Diffusion. Essentially, it decides to control the model ability and the chips advancement to control its penetration, AI penetration globally to China or the rest of the world. So that's the current stage. So, and that's why I'm thinking the DeepSeek phenomenon has going to have deep impact for the globalization, because at this stage, what DeepSeek achieved is through three things. It's firstly, it's much clearer technology route, because it's written everything in the articles, so everybody is copying it. Right now, all the model the model companies are really crazy day and night trying to cover this, and in China and across the world. So the model ability will really be leveled very soon. So that's the first thing. It's the transparency of the technology route. The second is the how to really dramatically reduce the cost. Reduce the cost, I'm talking about by 90%. So that's the second thing. The third thing is the open source strategy. So basically, China has open as the DeepSeek, and another company is called Cheung. It's actually owned by Alibaba. They have the much more open source strategy, such that a lot of people are using it. And what I'm showing here, you probably do not see it. Basically, in the Hugging Face, and also you can see that on the left plot, you can see this very vertical line is how the adoption of the DeepSeek by the developers at the Hugging Face is just dramatically. It has become the number two. And on the right side is if you look at the top of most of the top of the developers, they are actually using the open source models by the Cheung. So there's two Chinese companies, they actually have open source. So those three things together. One is providing the much more transparent technology route, which really reduce the experiment cost. The second is to reduce the cost of the developing and the use of the models. The third is using the open source strategy together that produces a different type of the scaling law. I will call this inclusive scaling law. So let me stop here. What I want to talk about is what can we expect from now on in the next several years. I think from now on we're entering a different stage of the AI. Right? because of this coming up of the DeepSeek and other companies, I think globally, it's not just China, and actually globally, the many other countries, I believe in Europe, in the Middle East, in other countries, the AI model ability will really catch up very quickly. And that also will promote a lot of those agents and robots applications. So now the reasoning models will be their ability will accelerate and really approach the level of OpenAI very quickly. And so we're going to see a very booming, inclusive AI penetration across the world. And that is dramatically, is so different from the past 2 years, dominated by the US companies. So this is my point. We are going to see a much more inclusive AI globalization in the next future several years. And given the time, I would just talk about this point. I will see, and the next time maybe we're going to have another round of the front dialogue. We'll talk about AI. But I think this is so interesting to talk about the nature and the stage of the AI development and its implication for the globalization. And so that's the technology side of this.